This is a simplified diagram of the weather, with the sunlight coming in at the top here and heat coming in from the oceans, and how it all gets mixed up. When you stand outside, you experience the weather. That is the sum total of everything from cosmic radiation in deep space to heat coming off the bottom of the oceans and everything in between. All right? It is what engineers call a white noise. It's as if you were standing outside of a football stadium and you're 100,000 people. That's a white noise. And what they're trying to tell you is that we know enough about the climate and the weather to be able to pick out individual noises in that stadium. And I'm here to tell you we don't and we can't. What this shows, this came out in 1991, and it was presented as proof that CO2 was driving temperature. Here's the current temperature of the Earth over here, and the blue line is the temperature, the red line is CO2. And the French researchers that brought this out, to Petit and Jouzel, but they were warning. They said, don't rush to judgment on this graph. Because if you look at this graph, when it's in a book, that's about 4 inches of graph that's covering 420,000 years. How much detail can you see? The answer is virtually nothing. Okay? Well, within 5 years, and they were saying, oh, this is proof. This is what these people that were using climate for a political agenda, they said this is proof that the temperature is driving, or CO2 is driving temperature. We knew within 5 years that it showed exactly the opposite. That the temperature changes before the CO2 changes. But what's the whole fundamental assumption that they make? They say, oh, CO2 goes up, the temperature will go up. That doesn't occur in any record anywhere in the world at any time in history. Nowhere. In fact, exactly the opposite happens. So the fundamental assumption they make about CO2 and temperature is wrong. But they blithely carry on because they know the public don't know that and don't understand that. So you can see that here. But by the way, well, I'll show you another graph. This shows you 600 million years of the Earth's history. I love it when they come on the radio and say, oh, it's the hottest day ever. Oh, boy, am I glad I lived long enough to see this. And I like to phone in and say, do you really mean ever? Well, no, it's in government record. Oh, that. Yeah, how did we ever survive before there was government? My goodness, it's amazing. And of course, that's something that you've got to look at. What this shows is the current level, CO2 is the red line. And here we are at the current level, 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And Al Gore tells you that's the highest level we've ever had. Look at this graph. It is in fact the lowest level we've ever had. Okay? And in fact, you could argue, looking at here, the last 300 million years, that the CO2 level has averaged around 1,000 to 1,200 parts per million. 3 times what we've currently got. And do you know how we know that's important to the Earth? Because if you go to the greenhouses on the coast here, the commercial greenhouses, they pump up to 1,200 parts per million of CO2 to get the plants to grow more vigorously. In fact, you could, and Dr. Idso has done 30 years of research showing that increased CO2 increases the yield of the plant. And it also, by the way, reduces the amount of water it uses. So I think that that's 300 million years of evolution of plants to an optimum level of about 1,200 parts per million. So you could argue, say, the plants are malnourished at 400 parts per million. Here's another interesting thing. About 480,000 or 480 million years ago, 438 million years, when the Democrats were still in power. Sorry. Remember, if you can't take a joke. But here's the temperature. The blue line is the temperature. This is the Ordovician Ice Age, 438 million years ago. An ice age. But what's the level of CO2? 4,000 parts per million. And they're telling you at 400 parts per million, we're in runaway potential of global warming. The evidence doesn't support anything that they're saying. Nothing. but they still push that agenda.